All right, strap in everybody, because today we are hitting the ultimate rewind button. We're talking about the book of Genesis.
Genesis, not just the first chapter of a book. I mean, come on, we're talking about the book, the one that underpins it all. The Hebrew Bible, the Christian Old Testament, all of it.
It's like the OG origin story, you know what I mean? And we're really going deep using the King James Version to see what this text, this ancient text, can tell us about, well, us, about what it means to be human.
We're starting right at the beginning. The word Genesis itself, it's Greek, right? Means origin. But there's something about the Hebrew title that always gets me, Bereshit.
Bereshit. Even just saying it, it just sounds, well, big.
It is big. Because it literally means in the beginning. Not just any beginning, but the beginning.
So we're talking about the ultimate setup here, the very first domino in the chain.
Exactly. And Genesis, this book, it just goes for it. Right off the bat, you're thrown into this primeval history.
You know, gotta be honest, every time I hear primeval history, I'm thinking, like, dinosaurs and volcanoes.
This is a little bit before T-Rex, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Primeval history, in this context, it's more like, imagine you're pulling way, way back on a camera. That's the section of Genesis. You've got the creation of everything, the Garden of Eden, Noah, the flood, the really big stuff.
Got it. So it's like the establishing shots before the good stuff gets going.
Exactly. And then Genesis zooms us in, and we get to the patriarchal history. Now we're getting up close and personal. This is where you meet the big names. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and these guys, they're not perfect.
Definitely not your average saints, that's for sure.
They're flawed, they're complicated, they wrestle with their faith, their families, their own desires.
It sounds pretty human to me.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating about Genesis is that it takes these huge theological ideas, creation, sin, covenant, big, heady stuff. But then it wraps it all up in these really human, sometimes messy, always dramatic family stories.
Well, if we're talking messy family drama, I think we got to talk about Cain and Abel, right? That is some next-level sibling rivalry.
Oh, tell me about it. Genesis chapter 4, two brothers, totally different paths in life, and a whole lot of jealousy brewing.
Okay, so we've got Cain, he's the farmer. He brings an offering to God from his crops. And then there's Abel, he's the shepherd, and he offers up, like, the first and best lamb from his flock. And God, and this is always a head-scratcher, God likes Abel's offering better.
And it doesn't really say WHY, does it? It's just one of those things theologians have been debating forever. Was it the offering itself, or was there something more going on? We just don't know for sure.
But what we do know is how Cain reacts. And let's just say it's not pretty. The guy is eaten alive by jealousy. So much so, he does the unthinkable.
The very first murder in human history. Talk about a family feud going way too far.
And this is what always gets me about Cain and Abel. So Cain kills his brother. He gets banished by God.
Yeah.
Where you'd figure he's going to wander off alone, totally racked with guilt. But no. What does Cain do? He goes and builds a city.
It's such a fascinating twist. It's almost like even in that horrible act, in that violence, there's this human urge to create, to build something that will last.
So it's not just about sin. It's about what comes after. How do we humans deal with the consequences of the bad stuff?
And that right there is one of those themes that runs through all of Genesis. This constant back and forth between good and evil, creation and destruction. We humans, we contain multitudes.
We sure do. And speaking of destruction, there's another guy in Genesis who takes a pretty dark turn, Lamech. And he makes Cain, well, Cain looks kind of tame compared to this guy. And Lamech, well, he doesn't just commit violence. I don't know, he kind of seems to revel in it.
That's the really unsettling part, isn't it? With Cain, it's this crime of passion, right? Jealousy, rage, boom. But Lamech, he's got this swagger about it. He actually brags about his violence.
It's right there in Genesis 4.23. He's like, if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. What's up with that? So he's trying to win some kind of prize for being bad.
It really makes you wonder, where are we going as a species at this point? Is Lamech Is this the inevitable endpoint? The more we sin, the worse it gets, and then we're bragging about it.
Or is it more of a warning? Like, look what happens if you let pride and violence run wild.
It's a question that sticks with you. And believe me, Genesis does not shy away from complicated stuff like that. But before we go further down that road, maybe we should circle back to someone who's, shall we say, a little brighter.
Brighter is good. Who are we thinking?
Enoch. Now, there's a guy who kept it pretty clean, at least according to Genesis.
Enoch. Oh, yeah, okay. He's the one who, hold on, I've got it right here. Genesis 5.24, walked with God, and he was not, for God took him.
You know, for as short as it is, that might be the most mysterious line in the whole book.
It really makes you think, What does it even mean to walk with God? Like, were they side by side? Did they have conversations?
And how did God take him? Was it like a beam of light? Did Enoch just disappear? Nobody knows.
Okay, but hold on. Bigger picture here.
Yeah.
What kind of life do you have to live for God to be like, all right, you're coming with me now?
Right. It makes you think, what did Enoch know that we don't?
Deep stuff. All right, so we've got murder, mystery. What's next on our Genesis highlight reel?
Well, I hate to say it, but after all that walking with God, things take a bit of a turn. We're heading into, well, let's just say you're going to need a bigger boat.
Oh, come on. You can't just drop bigger boat and not tell me we're talking about Noah and the flood.
I had to build a little suspense. But you're right, it's the story everyone knows. Mankind gets a little too wicked for God's liking. Time for a cosmic reset.
Cue the downpour. Right. But if I'm being honest, it's not the flood itself that gets me. It's everything that happens after the water goes down. It's like, shouldn't everyone be on their best behavior after that? You'd think.
You'd think. You'd hope. But that's not exactly how it goes down, is it? Even with a clean slate, it seems humanity has a knack for, well, making things complicated.
Case in point, that whole weird story with Noah and his son Ham.
Yes, Genesis chapter 9. Where do we even begin with that one?
Okay, so the basics. Noah's done a lot of celebrating post-flood. Maybe a little too much celebrating if you catch my drift.
Let's just say he was enjoying the fruits of the vineyard, perhaps a bit too liberally.
And Ham, he walks in on dear old dad, in a state of undress.
And this is where it gets tricky, because today, we might chuckle, maybe cringe a little, but back then, seeing your father naked, especially a father like Noah, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was a huge no-no.
Okay, but still,
Yeah.
Noah goes and curses Ham's son, Canaan, over this. Seems a little harsh, doesn't it?
Well, we have to remember, those ancient cultures, they looked at family, at authority, way differently. Nudity wasn't just about modesty. It was about power, respect, the whole patriarchal structure.
So it's more about what the nakedness represented, not the actual nakedness itself.
Precisely. And this idea of cursing Canaan, not Ham directly, that also lines up with ancient beliefs. They believed in this thing called collective punishment, the idea that what you did, it didn't just affect you, it echoed down through your family line.
Wow, talk about pressure. But we're not just talking about ancient history here, are we? This story, it's got a long and kind of disturbing legacy.
Unfortunately, you're right. This whole episode with Ham, it gets used later on and not in a good way. People use this story to try and justify some awful stuff. Slavery, oppression, all of it. Claimed certain groups of people were descended from Canaan, so they were meant to be subservient.
Which just goes to show how important it is to go back to the source to try and understand these stories in their original context.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, maybe it's time to shift gears, leave the flood behind, and set off on another journey. A journey that's just as epic, maybe a little less damp. Time to talk about Abraham.
Okay, so we're moving from watery chaos to, what? The founding of a nation. Isn't that what Abraham's all about?
Exactly. With Abraham, we're shifting into the patriarchal history part of Genesis. This isn't just one man's story anymore. It's the start of something huge.
It all starts with a promise, right? God makes this covenant with Abraham back in Genesis 12. Land, descendants, the whole 9 yards.
But there's a catch, a big one.
Because Abraham and his wife, Sarah, they weren't exactly spring chickens at this point, right?
Let's just say they were well past their baby-making prime. And that fact, Sarah's inability to have kids, it hangs over everything.
Yeah, it's one thing to have faith when everything's going your way. It's another thing entirely when it seems like God's forgotten to send you that all-important memo.
And that's where things start to get really interesting. Because into this already tense situation, we bring in Hagar.
Hagar. Right, Sarah's handmaid. So she's not just like bringing snacks and fanning Sarah with palm leaves.
Hagar becomes a pivotal character because Sarah, desperate to fulfill God's promise, even if it means bending the rules a bit, she tells Abraham to, well, let's just say, find another way to produce an heir.
Okay, so we've got Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar. You know where this is going. Talk about a recipe for drama.
It's a classic love triangle, but with, the fate of nations hanging in the balance, because both women end up having sons with Abraham. Ishmael is Hagar's son, and then finally Isaac is born to Sarah.
It's giving, I don't know, a whole new meaning to blended family, and I'm guessing everyone did not just sit down and have a nice family dinner after that.
You'd be surprised. But you're right, there's rivalry, there's jealousy, questions of inheritance, who gets the land, who gets to be the chosen one.
And on that note, how could we forget Jacob and Esau? Those two take family drama to a whole other level. Talk about sibling rivalry.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking deception, stolen blessings, and some seriously questionable parenting choices.
And let's not forget, they were twins. Twins! You'd think they'd be like best friends, but nope.
Not these two. And the way Genesis describes them, it's just chef's kiss. You've got Esau, the hairy hunter, coming in from the fields all rugged and hungry. And then there's Jacob, the smooth-skinned mama's boy, cooking up schemes in the tent.
It all comes to a head in Genesis chapter 27. Rebekah, Jacob's mom, she helps him trick his dad, Isaac, who, by the way, is blind at this point, into giving Jacob the blessing that was meant for Esau, the older son.
I mean, talk about a mother's love, right? Or is it manipulation? Rebecca, she was convinced this was God's plan all along. But was she right to meddle like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to be on the receiving end of her motherly advice. But Jacob, his story doesn't end there, does it?
No.
He's constantly on the move, running from his brother, working for his tricky Uncle Laban, having all those kids.
And then, of course, there's that whole wrestling match.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We can't forget about Jacob's little wrestling match. Except it wasn't with just anyone, was it?
Nope.
Huh.
Genesis 32. Picture it. Jacob's alone in the wilderness, middle of the night, and he ends up wrestling with God, like physically fighting.
I'm guessing they weren't fighting over the remote control. What's the deeper meaning there?
It's one of those stories that just gets under your skin, you know? It makes you think about your own struggles.
Because we all have those wrestling matches, don't we? Those moments where we're grappling with something bigger than ourselves, something we don't fully understand. And sometimes those wrestling matches, they leave a mark. Just like Jacob, he walked away with a limp, right? A reminder of that encounter.
Exactly. Those moments that shake us, challenge us, yeah, they change us. But in changing us, they also shape us, mold us into, well, maybe into the people we're meant to be all along.
Makes you wonder, what are the encounters, the experiences that have really shaped us? What are our wrestling matches, so to speak?
It's a question worth asking. But for Jacob, even with all those struggles, all that running, he does find his way back. He comes full circle.
We're talking about that moment when he's on his deathbed, right? Genesis 49.
Yeah, powerful stuff. He calls all 12 of his sons to him. And these aren't just any sons. They're going to be the start of the 12 tribes of Israel.
And Jacob, he gives each of them a blessing. But not just a generic, good luck out there kind of blessing.
No, these are personalized. He speaks to each son, acknowledges their strengths, their weaknesses. It's almost like he can see the future, see what those qualities will mean for each of their tribes.
I always get chills reading that part. It's like you could just feel the weight of those words, the impact they're going to have, not just on those sons, but on generations to come. Talk about a legacy.
It makes you think about the legacies we inherit and the ones we leave behind. But even as Jacob's life is ending, there's this sense of, of connection to everything that came before. Remember where he's buried? The cave of Machpelah.
Wait, isn't that the same cave Abraham bought? Way back at the beginning of our Genesis deep dive.
The very same. It's that sense of return, going back to your roots, finding rest alongside your ancestors.
It's a good place to end our own little journey with Genesis, isn't it? Because for all the drama, all the twists and turns, all those wrestling matches, this book really drives home the point that we're all part of something bigger, connected to the past, to the future, by these stories, these shared human experiences.
And there's something really hopeful about that, don't you think? I mean, yeah, there's chaos. There's always going to be chaos, floods, feuds, doubts. But even in the middle of all that, there's this persistent hope for redemption, for second chances, for a future that's shaped by our choices, by the connections we make.
So, as we close the book on Genesis, at least for today, it does make you wonder, what kind of story are we writing with our own lives? If we were standing before Jacob, what would our blessing be? What would he see in you, Est?
It's a good question to think about, because we are writing our own stories, aren't we? Every day. And who knows, maybe someday someone will be looking back at our lives, trying to decipher the meaning, find some wisdom in the choices we made.
Until then, all we can do is keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions. And maybe, just maybe, keep an eye out for those wrestling matches. You never know what you might learn on the other side. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.